And welcome back to another episode of Deck Breakdown. My name's Alzorath, and today we are going to be covering one of Preybird's decks. Originally we were going to do a Gwen deck for this one, but he recently released an article about one of his choice Eladwen decks, and it's a modification of an Eladwen Rush, and it's an SEN exclusive. I'm going to do this deck breakdown of that particular deck, kind of as a co-release with that. I went back and decided to test this one instead. I've already tested the other one, so it might be next week's episode that we do a Gwen. Maybe not. We'll find out. I'll probably have another channel update soon after posting this one regarding a contest I want to hold involving deck breakdown and a little bit of shadow crystals for you guys. And yeah, we will go ahead and move on into the deck. Now, this deck is basically your run-of-the-mill, well, I wouldn't say run-of-the-mill Eladwen Rush deck. Eladwen Rush tends to focus on getting allies out fast and using your burn spells to help finish off the opponent, and if you have to control the field, control the field. Now, ideally, you just want to go be straight for the throat with this kind of deck, and most Eladwen Rush decks do an okay job at it. I personally prefer Portal Magi for my Rush mages, and I have my reasons for that, and obviously they end up killing about the same turn in ideal situations. It's just I find Portal Magi tends to have a bit more of a backup plan, if you will. Anyway, let's go ahead and cover the cards in the deck. You have, of course, your hero, and her ability plays a key role in this in controlling the field. You don't have to kill all the allies, you just have to disable them, and her ability is great at that. It's also great at killing opponents. And you do have board wipes. The allies in this one are, you have the 4 Pewins, the 4 Aldens, 4 Priests, which are going to be your low-cost allies. Honestly, I kind of crave a bit more in the way of allies in this deck. It doesn't seem to have the sheer upfront force that you need to just zerg the field. A lot of other Eladwen decks tend to have a bit more in the way of allies. You also have your higher cost allies, which I'm counting the 4, 5, and 6 range. You have your 2 Tainted Oracles, your 2 Armored Sandworms, and your 2 Aeons. Aeons I usually end up sacrificing. They have played a role in saving my butt later on. They are one of the contingency cards, which this, in my opinion, this deck, it plays kind of like a Foodalile deck. You have to either, it's got a weird pace to it for my personal play style, which it works out. I mean, it's not horrible on that regard. It does work out, and it does take some getting used to get to work right. And with the use of burn cards, you are able to overcome a little bit of this pacing, but they only last for so much. This deck has a very heavy draw engine. It has 3 Tomes of Knowledge, 4 Bad Santas, and of course the 2 Tainted Oracles. That's a grand total of 9 draw engines. And, well, 5 of them are unilateral, 2 of them are bilateral. Personally, I love the use of Bad Santa in Rush decks, because you're wanting to get your cards out fast, and usually you'll have cheaper cards. This deck, it tends to settle a lot into the upper ranges while I'm playing it, and I think that just might be a little bit of bad luck during my testing, but you just can't seem to flood the field fast enough to really work it out as a full-on Rush deck. It's more of a mid-tempo Rush deck, if you will, in my opinion. Now, it does work out for a number of people, and it does work out even if you aren't that great at playing this kind of deck. There are some changes I would make to it. Of course, I forgot to mention the Leyline Nexuses are very important to this deck because it allows you to get rid of, against rogues and hunters, it lets you get rid of the Spell Eater bands, and against other mages and warriors, it lets you get rid of Snow Sapphire, as well as some opponent weapons like Gwen's bows and various other things. All in all, it's a decent deck, but honestly, I find that it lacks in the way of contingency plans. If you don't get this initial rush, you're fairly screwed, in my opinion. It's not a guaranteed loss, but it's a little difficult to recover, especially if the opponent gets a more ideal draw than you. A lot of my decks are based around having these contingency plans, so I'm used to having a plan A, plan B, and if I really need it, a plan C. This one kind of has a plan A and a plan C. It lacks really against the mid-game players. If you get a game stretched out, you're going to run out of firepower as well, although the supernovas allow you to kind of mitigate that a little bit, forcing it into a draw usually. My personal changes to this deck, if I were to change it up, I'd probably get rid of the sandworms. Yes, they are a decent late game focus, but I find myself wanting to shift this to a much lower curve so I can play a lot of allies rather than relying on 1 or 2 allies a turn. If I have 6 resources and have 3 Pewins in my hand, I want to play all 3 Pewins. That's just a rough example of it. But you won't ever have 3 Pewins. You will want to play those as soon as you get them. The Priest of the Light I definitely agree with including. It is very good in rush decks, especially if you can keep the board a little bit under control, just enough to get them out and get them to stay 1 turn, because with an Alden, they deal 4 damage. Plus they give you that shadow energy advantage and a little bit of a heal. I find lower cost allies would actually also help make better use of the Bad Santa, because Bad Santa gives you a flood of cards as well as your opponent, and you're going to maybe have 1 or 2 early on Bad Santas, and you can Santa Bomb with this deck and it works perfectly fine. Although I find myself drawing these turn 4, turn 5 cards and it's just not going to work out. Tome of Knowledge, if you get it early on, sack it. Later on, and you have the resources, go ahead and drop it and draw a card that turn. That seems to work out best with that one. Honestly, I can see this deck actually running without Tome of Knowledge and just replacing it with 2 Tainted Oracles and another low-cost ally. Personally, I would ditch the Armored Sandworms and at least one of the Tomes of Knowledge and bring in some Jasmines. She's a solid 3-cost ally. It would lower your curve quite a bit and would fit in. You'd end up with a nice 3-cost curve. This deck could also be modified to use Portal, although it would require a decent bit more modification, and I was doing some experimentation with Portal, and for if you make this into a fatter deck with Portal and a bunch of low costs, it actually works out all right. It doesn't work out any better or worse. It kind of has the same win ratio for me lately, so that's just one of the things I was testing with this. Aeon, very nice card. If you're going to keep the current curve of the cards, honestly, if you're keeping Aeon basically, and you want to keep a 5-cost card, I personally would replace the Aeon with your, I'm forgetting the name of it, Earthen Protector. There we go. That way you have a recovery of Aeon, because as it stands, you're not going to be able to bring out enough force behind him whenever you finally get him out to really have that wave of force, which is what Aeon is really good at. It's good at building up that powerful, like, strong arm behind him to handle late game problems. He just falls too easily with this deck. That's why I like Earthen Protectors. If you had Jasmines, it would kind of mitigate that a little bit by letting you delay the opponent. And with the number of allies I've been running against, he just falls too easy right now. Now, he is a very powerful card, and I would definitely keep him in this one. And I would keep him in most Rush Eladwen decks, period. It's just a question of what do you want to shift down? I mean, you can sacrifice some of these Supernovas. Personally, I rarely use more than 2 a game. Honestly, 4. By the time you've used 4 of them, you're going to just be going into a draw state. Leyline Nexus I would definitely keep. It has saved my butt several times. The only ones it's really not that great against are things like Zaladar, unless they're reliant on the Dimension Ripper. And even then, what they're going to draw from you, unless you've already drawn them early on, or you're basically a third of your deck is these allies. I would like to push up the low-cost allies up to probably about half the deck and rely on spells to give them a little bit more punch. And one of the biggest banes I've actually run against in this deck is enemies using Infernal Gargoyles. Oddly enough, that has been the major contention point for me because this deck really just lacks any solid way of dealing with gargoyles. If you look through here, the only card that can one-shot them is your Supernova. You either have to soften them with a lightning bolt and waste an attack on them, or go with something like your Armored Sandworm, and that's going to just ping it for 1 damage. Then you'll have to follow it in with either a 4 damage hit from a Fireball or your ability, or 2 hits from your smaller guys. I'm not really liking that. It's a decent deck, and it has gone through a lot of work to refine it. Don't get me wrong, it is definitely a well-performing deck. I could see it getting you up into the 300s if you had the patience to stick with it. There are better decks for that right now than an Eladwen, because people have shifted in meta to counter the mage decks, so I wouldn't really rely on them too much right now. I would be shifting more towards probably, honestly, Hunters and Rogues are, I think, where it's going to be at next. I see the expansion changing this a lot, but that's a whole different deal. We'll see when that comes out. Some definitely must keep in the deck. Definitely Alden, definitely Priest, definitely Pew, and he's got the early board advantage. Some things you might consider switching in for cards that you find yourself not using a lot. You have the turn 1 drop that's become almost infamous. And honestly, I love this card. A lot of people either dismiss it entirely or overemphasize it. It can be a game changer if you have it kind of at your disposal. Christopher Wilde, definitely not something to ignore. And Preybird actually covers the reason for no Jasmines in his thread. I personally think Jasmines would be a better addition than some of the other cards in this deck, as she is a fairly solid ally. And while she does go against the go for the throat mentality, she is still a 3/4 for 3 resources. And Priest of the Light is a 3/3 for 3 resources. She has more staying power, which means she has more of a chance to survive to that next turn to deal her damage. I wouldn't dismiss her entirely. I would skip out on any of the 4 or higher allies. If you're looking for late game contingencies, like if you're having trouble killing them early on, you probably shouldn't do a Rush Eladwen deck. But if you want a late game contingency, things like Dagger of Unmaking is a good one. It's right down over here. Let you flash it up and look at it. I wouldn't really go with any armors unless you want to splash in maybe 2 Snow Sapphires, and that is it. I really wouldn't push for too many late game things with this deck. It works good as a starter rush deck. There are just tweaks that need to be made to make it go faster. One thing I find myself missing is, and I've actually tested it with a splash in of damage over time spells. They work okay. They kind of slow up your opponent a little bit. If you're going to switch to Portal, I would honestly probably go with a fatter deck and just rely on a heavier draw engine and stick with things below 4 cost. That way you can Portal and drop effectively by turn 6. The real powerhouses of Shadow Portal decks are usually around turn 7 to turn, I'd have to say 8 or 9. At turn 10 you get some real crazy stuff, but that's late game. And most people have some crazy plays by then anyway. Either that or they've dwindled out and it's just kind of a war of attrition. You have the Earthen Protector here. Honestly, I prefer it over the Sandworm. And one thing is, if you're facing another mage, if you can get that Earthen Protector in behind an Aeon and then have the Aeon pump it for 1, a Supernova, even if they've damaged the Aeon down to enough to kill the Aeon, your Earthen Protector will survive and then sacrifice itself to bring the Aeon back even bigger. And yes, Earthen Protector's ability stack. For those of you who don't know, let's say you have, I'm going to explain a weird mechanic here. I don't know if this is intentional or not, but let's say you have an Aeon out, he's a 3/8, and you have an Earthen Protector. Someone assassinates your Aeon. Okay, it dies. It comes back with +2/+2. That makes it a 5/10, I believe. 510. Now, let's say you get another Earthen Protector out and they kill the Aeon again. Whenever it dies, it's going to come back as a 712. They stack. This is a kind of a sneaky mechanic that a few people use, and I've been guilty of using it in the past, and it really is not that bad. Another reason to use the Earthen Protector is if you do end up with an Aeon out and a little bit of force behind it, and they drop a field wipe, well, like Supernova or something like that, or they kill the Aeon and start killing off your other allies. First of all, your Aeon will pop back from the Earthen Protector. But let's say they Supernova your Alden that's out. The Earthen Protector will sacrifice itself and revive the Alden. Another good thing, because that makes him a 4/6. And whenever he's attacking is a 5/6. So yeah, it's nothing to really be scoffed at. I do think ally choices in this deck are crucial to its success. And it has the startings of a good ally set, in my opinion. And there's definitely reasons for why these specific things are in here. I just don't see myself actually having much success with it. At least not in my tests so far. It feels like the way it plays for me is slightly unrefined. It plays for me, I hate to bring up Feudal Isle again, but it plays for me just like a standard Feudal Isle deck, which they are very powerful decks if you can wrap your playstyle around them, which a lot of people can't. And if I were to build the deck, yeah, it would be a little different. I would have had enough time to test and tweak, and I would have spent weeks or months refining the deck to a fine kind of polished finish, kind of like I've tweaked the cards in my Lone Wolf a lot, even since the last video, to where it runs smoothly for me, yet other people seem to have trouble with the pacing of control in it. I have a feeling that's partially what I'm running into here. But yeah, it's a good deck, and it's definitely worth looking at. I don't see it being a real top tier deck per se. I see it just being competitive. I'm thinking about including rankings with these. I'm not sure whether I should or not. If I were to give it out of a score of 10, I'd give it maybe a 7.5, 8. It just doesn't feel fast enough to be a rush deck. And he does call it the Hardened rush deck. It doesn't feel very hard. It doesn't really have much in the way of staying power, really. Of course, most mage decks don't. They lack healing. They lack defense for the most part, except for the Snow Sapphire. But I see this more as a mid-turn kind of thing. It's kind of, if you're lucky, you can win it. I don't really feel like I'm at a disadvantage against any particular opponents with this deck, which is a nice advantage in quick matches. I also don't feel like I have a particular advantage either, which I feel with certain other decks, which I will cover later. But yeah, those are my opinions on this deck, and I feel the curve could be lowered and it could be made faster to really emphasize that rush part. I think it's kind of leaned more towards the hardened part and not really made itself stand out as far as its speed. So maybe it if I were to rename this one, I'd just call it Basic Eladwen. Because outside of not having damage over time and having an exceptionally high draw engine, it kind of it plays as a mix of direct damage and allies, as a standard Eladwen should. I feel like I'm rambling now. I meant to include other points. I'm kind of recording this because I would like to have an episode out per week, even though I'm having computer problems. Speaking of which, I should be able to get back to making regular episodes on, I think, beginning of December, for those interested. That's what it's looking like right now, unless something happens that that ends up sucking my money away. Which very well might. I've had really bad luck with money this year. So yeah. that's my opinion on the Preybird's Hardened Eladwen deck. It's kind of a group effort production according to his thread, which I will try to remember to link to in the description. Of course, you have to realize I'm recording this a day in advance of releasing it. I'm recording this on Halloween. Hopefully no one comes knocking at my door. But yeah, that is the Preybird Hardened Eladwen Rush deck. I would not recommend it for brand new players, but for a seasoned player who is able to adjust their tempo to match the deck that they're playing, it'd definitely be worthwhile looking at and trying out, and probably will give you some ideas on how to tweak your own Eladwen deck. So yeah, if you enjoy my Shadow Era content or any of my other content, be sure to like, subscribe, comment below. And yeah, I will see you guys next time on Deck Breakdown, or whenever I finally get another show up. I'll see you then. And be on the lookout for my contest video, which it'll be open only to subscribers to my channel, and I'm debating whether to only post it on the SEN website as well to promote that. 'Cause while I am only over media there, I do enjoy being part of the network as a whole and do wish to see it succeed. There's several people working on it, and there's a whole lot of visions going into it, so it's going to take some time to figure out exactly where its niche is, but it will get there eventually. Anyway, peace out. This has been Alzorath, and this has been another episode of Deck Breakdown. Keep gaming, have fun.